few announcements before introducing the ambassador. I would like to thank Arthur Anderson and Company for sponsoring today's reception and announce a few up-and-coming programs. April 14, Mr. James Grant, the Executive Director of UNICEF. April 27, the Japanese Caravan. May 18, Munir Benjek, Vice President of External Affairs for the World Bank. And May 25th, Helmut Sonnefeld of the Brookings Institute. Americans have been particularly interested in India in the post-World War II era. We have had sympathy for anti-colonialism and the moralism of Gandhi and his heirs. And this enormous state has captured the imagination of many as an important experiment in democracy and modernization. As a regional power of great size, potential wealth, and strategic location, and as a unique leader in the third world, she is intrinsically important to America's global policy. Necessarily, the tangled relationships between the United States, the Soviet Union, Pakistan, and India have not always been smooth, and the differences on specific issues will emerge as India and the United States pursue their interests in differing contexts. The Council is very fortunate to have as guests to discuss the relationships of the United States and India, the distinguished ambassador, His Excellency K.R. Narayana. It is an honor and a pleasure to welcome the ambassador to the Council.
President Bolton and distinguished friends, I am very grateful to you for giving me this opportunity to meet you and talk to you, facing this very large audience and this magnificent view. You have given me a very broad subject, India and the United States and shared values. Actually, this is another way of putting the relationships between India and the United States, rather in a fundamental way. I think even though we live in different parts of the world in terms of geography and our historical experience is very different, though we have a common colonial experience in the past, but the historical experience is very different. The context of our social and economic development also different. But as people, there are some very deep as well as some subtle values which we share. First of all, I am here talking to you. This is a country where people like to talk to other people, especially from other lands, out of curiosity, for friendship, for developing friendly sentiments. I think it was Aristotle who defined man as a rational animal. Actually, man, certainly woman, is more a talking animal and an arguing animal. We in India particularly enjoy talking and arguing. I have found that this is some very strong common characteristics we have with people in this country. Unlike a country with which you are very close, Great Britain, where I read, I think it was one of the great British writers who tried to distinguish the characteristics of the Englishman and the American. He said that if an Englishman and an American, they are traveling in the same bus, an American will never stop talking until there is a fatal accident. While a Britisher will never open his mouth until there is such an accident. So, in contrast to this, between Indians and Americans, as you would notice if you travel in our country, that I have noticed when I travel in this country, we are so tremendously inquisitive, ask questions, almost embarrassingly sometimes, of each other. If you go on a train journey in India, you get very intimate questions about yourself and your family before you have seen the man even for 5 minutes. and this approach to life, or openness, or trying to know, trying to understand, behind this there are some major fundamental values. And I think it is these values which have brought us together in spite of our vast geographical distance, in spite of the developmental experience, which is very different with a highly developed, affluent society, and ours, as the President put it, a society modernizing itself from very almost from a feudalistic, or shall I say, even worse than that, a static state of society. And it is common knowledge that the democratic system is really the one word which encompasses all our affinities. But behind democracy, there are ideas, there are principles, there are values. These are the humane values which we share. And there is no democracy without tolerance. And in spite of various troubles, sometimes conflicts, which take place in one part of India or other, because it is a vast country with millions of people, we cannot have any place without something happening somewhere at some time. In spite of all this, the major fact in India of our social, economic and political life is that of tolerance. Millions of people belonging to different religions, of course millions of Hindus, and we have nearly 80 to 85 million Muslims. In fact, the third largest Islamic nation in the world. We have Christians of long standing, coming from the days of the apostles themselves. There are Jews who have settled down there from the time the Temple of Solomon was destroyed. Small community, but a community which not just survived, lived in amity throughout history without any kind of conflict with the rest of the population. In fact, I saw a film made in New York by an American lady about the Jewish community in India. And she says, though the community is small, you find that India was one country where the Jews did not experience any discrimination or lack of toleration throughout their long existence in our country. Now, this complex mixture of peoples, of races, of cultures and languages living together fairly harmoniously. And I don't say that it is a lovely garden. We have problems like in other places. We have troubles once in a while. But the major fact is harmonious living together. And why it is possible is because of the historic tradition of tolerance. I think without tolerance, there is no democracy. Democracy really means that while you may differ with some person or some section or some political party, you are able to tolerate this opposition and live together while differing, what I say often, differing decently. You disagree in a, no, but not necessarily in a disagreeable manner, as it has been put. And it is this tolerance which I think is the basis of American political and social system also. And we can find in history, which is not very much emphasized these days, the intellectual and philosophical relations between India and the United States. those who have seen the film Mahatma Gandhi would know that Gandhi had read Thoreau. In fact, he was very much influenced by some of his ideas. And we also know that in turn, Gandhi inspired Martin Luther King here in our own time. And if one reads Emerson or Walt Whitman, you will find manifestations of Indian philosophy and Indian thought in these great writings. Therefore, there has been a very long tradition of intellectual and philosophical relationships between India and the United States. But this has somehow remained under the surface. This has not been brought out to the surface and emphasized as it is in regard to your relationship with the Greek philosophy or the Roman philosophy or the thought of Europe. But it is a fact. Our great thinkers and our great writers have reacted to one another in spite of the remoteness of each other, from each other. Now, in our own time, I'm sure all of you must have seen at least one Indian or another among you living in this great country. Now, almost all of them are highly educated people coming from India, professionals, scientists, doctors, businessmen, teachers. And how is it that a developing country like India has been able to produce so many bright people who come here? We didn't send them, they came here. and who are able to adapt themselves, in fact, mix very beautifully into the professional and social system in this country. Not only improve their own fortunes, but make some contribution, be it in science or technology or in the various professions. It has been possible for our people to do this because of the great affinity we have between the educational systems in the two countries. Because it is our schools and our universities which produce these people, often under a highly subsidized educational system. And then they come here, take another degree or some training, and they could very easily fit into American society and even the competitive race in American society. So behind our democratic system, there is this affinity in education and in the educational system between our two countries, which is what produces some degree of akiness in thinking and in values. We do not often notice these things, that it is these cultural, philosophical and intellectual things which really makes it possible for us to understand each other and live together friendly, in spite of differences sometimes in political and other fields. Now, when I talk about values which we share, we have also to think of interests which we share. It is not quite obvious to people that India, far away, a struggling, developing country, can have much significance to the United States in terms of its vital national interest, a great power, military, economic power. What can India bring in terms of interest to the United States? Especially because this India follows a foreign policy which sounds very often elusive and mysterious and ununderstandable. Concepts like non-alignment. One doesn't know what kind of an animal it is. You know alignment, people who align with you, who are with you militarily. But people who say that I'm not aligned to you or anybody else, it is something difficult for powerful nations to understand. Powerful nations who demand obedience, who demands agreement, who demands others to think like you on all issues. So, in spite of all these kind of political differences or difficulties in understanding, if one thinks of larger interest, one will find that India, by being a democratic society, an established society, a country where democracy has not just survived after independence during the last 34 years, even though survival itself was important, because many countries with the same heritage, colonial, semi-colonial democratic heritage from Britain or France or Holland, somehow were not able to maintain their democratic system many years after the colonial rulers went. I won't grant that either the British or the French or the Dutch were practicing democracy in their colonies, but they introduced some elements of democracy. And we also learned about some of the political institutions connected with democracy, which British introduced to India. But how is it that after the British left, they had a vast empire? After British left, it's only in a very few countries that this democracy has survived. Other places, the democratic systems went down under military dictatorships or other kinds of dictatorship or other ideological developments. So it has been possible for India to remain a democracy because what I said earlier, some of the values, principles and ideas behind our society, and also because of the modern leadership we had, a leadership which believed very sincerely and very passionately in democracy and wanted to make democracy work in India. And they contributed a lot. Particularly, a leader like Mahatma Gandhi, though he did not talk in political terms about democracy, but he aroused the people and then imbued in them the idea of peaceful, non-violent change. Democracy is nothing if it is not a method of peace. And the deepest method of peace is through non-violence. I mean, in a rational sense. If you change somebody by using force, it is not a democratic method. So ultimately, the mass movement of non-violence, which Gandhiji preached and practiced in India in his lifetime, was a very important contribution to the survival and development of democratic system in our country. Now, you can ask, what is it just a theoretical thing only for the United States? India as a democracy. There are many countries in the world which are not democratic, which are very good friends of the United States. So why do you bother about democracy? We can safeguard our interests by having good relations with many countries, whatever be the social, economic and political system in that country. Now, I would like to ask, if there is an ideological contest in the world, and if it is democracy and if it is, and against any other political system, maybe fascism, maybe communism or some form of totalitarianism, in the long run, can the democracies of the world really survive if it is limited to a few countries in Western Europe and in America, with the vast millions in the world belonging to some other ideology or system? Therefore, in any reckoning, in the long run, the fact that 700 million people of India are dedicated to democracy and practice it and made it their institutional framework for their life brings in a strength, a sustenance to the other great democracies for the world in the perspective of time. If all the developing countries, including populous countries like ours, belong to another system and they follow that system, in the long run, I think it is unlikely that democracy in the world as a whole will have the support from millions of people which you need for its own accomplishments. I think, to my mind, the fact of democracy in India adds something to world democracy and therefore to US democracy and US United States also. When I say this, I also admit very frankly that the fact that there is such a great democracy like the United States here, which is powerful and developed, is a support for democracy in India. Therefore, there is this very important mutual relationship. But I want to say one thing. We do not want to play the game of democracy as a crusade. Democracy is for us, but it is not a crusade against something or other. Once you make it a crusade, I think you lose the essence of democracy, because the crusade is always an intolerant way of fighting other ideas or other systems. So you lose the soul of democracy once you make it into a crusading philosophy or a crusading political system. This is why we are happy, we are satisfied with democracy in our own country. We feel that if there is any danger to our country, it is essentially internal, arising from extremist ideas and political forces in our society. So if you safeguard our democracy, we need not have to worry too much about external threats to our values and to our social and political systems. Of course, we do worry about it, not that. But the basis of this, of our existence, is our internal success, so that we don't give any other subversive force or totalitarian force a grip on the minds of the people. Because if millions are gripped by such ideas, there is no way we can save ourselves. We want to prevent that. Secondly, in terms of interest, in a more, shall I say, more realistic sense, the fact that India is a democracy and is a stable country, one of the most stable areas in the world, especially in Asia, Middle East, Africa, or Latin America, where governmental changes took place in an orderly manner through elections and not by violent revolution. This is really the essence of orderliness, that you can, the government, our first leaders passed away, a new people came in without a struggle for power in a violent sense, and then we have a change of parties, and we change the party again by elections. So all the major political changes which took place in India were through peaceful democratic means. And that we could do these critical transitions in power in such a vast area with so many economic and social problems shows the stability of our system. And the second thing is the economic and social advance we made in a concrete sense by applying the democratic method to difficult and complex economic and social problems. But whatever we have achieved in terms of industrialization or agricultural revolution or social reform, these have been through democratic means. I don't think there are many countries who apply the method of democracy to basic economic development. Your country was in a very fortunate situation, therefore it's a unique situation. You brought your ideas, you brought your capital, you brought your technology from somewhere more or less, and then added to it in a brilliant and spectacular way. In Europe, the great democracies came really after the Industrial Revolution. During the Industrial Revolution, the workers had hardly any voting rights in most of the countries of Europe. So democracy, as you know, in Britain or France, came after your major industrial development. While in India, when we were starting our industrial development and economic progress, and there were rising expectations for immediate satisfactions by the people and with political freedom fully operating. In this context, we had to develop ourselves. That is why what I say, the application of the democratic method to basic social and economic development. And this development, to my mind, has not been anything very insignificant. Though some other experiments had dazzled this country, but when people sat down and thought about the actual relative achievements of even some of the other countries, it is shown that India has done some very meaningful, very substantial things in terms of economic development. We have become agriculturally self-sufficient in food grains. Maybe nutritional standards have yet to be raised for the generality of the people. But the fact is that a country which is subjected to major famines, even during the great British Raj, in fact it was during that period, we had a major famine every 25-30 years. And whatever may be our shortcoming, our deprivations today, we never had a famine of that sort after independence. And we have today emerged as a self-sufficient country in terms of food grain production. From a country which had produced hardly anything industrially. I recall in 1948 when I returned from London, being a student there, if you go even to the great city of Bombay and look at the shops, there's hardly anything there which was not foreign imported. Even the fountain pens and watches and radios, they were all foreign imported. Now today, I think 95%, if not more, of the consumption goods with the vast millions of India use are produced in India itself. And we have gone into heavy industrialization, whether it is manufacture of cars or aircraft or ships or steel mills or cement mills, textile mills, we are able to do ourselves. And that is, today India is rated, though we are still primarily an agricultural country, as the 10th largest industrial nation in the world. A country with the 3rd largest pool of scientists and technically trained people. Now, this is the basis of our progress and stability. Now, as I pose the question, what does it mean for the United States when India is not aligned with the United States? This is what many people have in mind, and also a misconception that when we may be tilting in favor of the Soviet Union. Now, it is better for me to say about tilt to the Soviet Union. Our Prime Minister answered that we don't tilt this way or that way. She said, I stand straight. If you look at it negatively, if India was really with the Soviet Union, you can imagine what the political and strategic situation in Asia would have been today. If, as it is sometime in some newspaper article, something is written that India is favoring the United States, it has some special relations with the United States, Soviet Union, and tilting towards the Soviet Union. If it was true, then the strategic situation in our part of the world would have been so hopeless for the Western countries that this country would have had to divert a considerable bit of its resources to our area in order to safeguard its vital interests. This is a negative way of saying it. If I may put it more positively, the fact that we are a stable country, progressive country, and a democratic country, this has prevented, this has produced a stability and security for ourselves in our area, so that you can have, as sometimes been said, that an attitude of benevolent neglect towards India. This is a phrase which is very often used, and nobody had benevolently neglected India in the past. And if for anybody it is possible to neglect India in this way, it is because through the success of our democratic system and the success of our policies and economic development, we have provided an area of stability and security in our part, which is helpful even for this country in a concrete way. And this is the meaning of Indian democracy and Indian progress, that we have not allowed any other force, whether it is another country or another subversive sort of political force, to catch hold of India or Indian mind and pose a threat to the vital interest of the United States. This fact of preventing other countries from operating through India against the United States is the maximum security comfort an independent country like ours can bring to a nation like this. And if we had adopted a path of alignment, joined with either the Soviet Union or the United States, both of which we did not like, because we wanted to have an independent path of our own. We have a culture, interests, geographical inclinations of our own. So we thought we have a right to develop our own way without being adjunct of any great country. And but the security significance for the US is that we have prevented any other country or any other political force to operate through India against the interest of this country in our part of the world. We have assured this, that we have made the situation to some extent for the Soviet Union also. They don't feel a threat through India to their vital interests, and therefore they also have been forced more or less by circumstances to accept our independence and accept what we have in India. And this has enabled us to isolate ourselves, not from the world, because we believe in world cooperation, but from the conflicts and antagonisms of the world, so that to the extent possible in this interdependent world, we could chalk out a path of our own for our people, putting the main emphasis not on ideological or military confrontations, but on development, on democracy, on trying to better the standards of our people, which is really the major contribution we have made to world peace. Thank you very much.
The ambassador has been good enough to agree to answer your questions until approximately 5 minutes after 7. Do you have any first question? Yes, sir.
Mr. Ambassador, I've read articles on the movie Gandhi, and one of the articles talked about Ben Kingsley in the filming of the movie being almost compared to Gandhi himself by the people. One man came over and kissed his feet, and he picked the man up, Ben Kingsley picked the man up and said, "I'm not Gandhi, don't do that." And he said, "But you'll bring Gandhi back." How much does his spirit still live in India?
I tell you, I was a more or less an adult, a youth when Gandhi lived, and people had not followed him in that, shall I say, fanatically obedient manner, even when he was alive. I tell you, I have attended some of his big meetings when I was a student. They listened to him. They did not worship him in that way, even when he walked in flesh and blood. In fact, there are many people who disagreed with him. Even some of his closest associates, that Jawaharlal Nehru, debated with him on philosophical grounds, on practical grounds. So it was not a kind of religious obedience that Gandhi produced in people. If some old man has done this, I mean, I can believe it. Indians are a sentimental people. They do sometimes indulge in sentimental things, but it doesn't mean that he's worshipping anybody. I can tell you that. and people are not so ignorant. This is also one thing in Indian religion or in Indian thing. Anybody who is authentic or anything which is sincere is respected in India. And I don't think this man, if he did that, I believe Ben Kingsley, if he said it, did not go to him worship as a god, but he was enchanted by this. You get movie stars in a different way, go around, how mad it is, I've seen people crowding around them as if they are demigods, asking for autographs and this and all that. This is a different cultural manifestation in a different society or some of these things. And it is not a godly worship, I can tell you, after all, one of the Indians shot him.
Yes, sir.
Your Excellency, my question is in two parts. Number one is, do you agree that there is a progressive erosion in the moral and spiritual values in the world today? And I'm talking about India and America, United States of America. And the part two of the question is it possible that secular government can they inculcate or reintroduce or reinfuse the moral and spiritual values in growing population all over again?
Well, I don't want to take a high moral position and say that people around me or in this country or in India are less moral or they're losing their moral sense. Certainly, modern technology and the great changes in life, traditional life, brought about by modern technology, has produced a confusion of values, doubts, anxieties, which disturb the old codes of behavior. And people have been almost compelled by these new circumstances to find new ways of behaving, or in a state of skepticism or confusion of values. And after all values are produced also by circumstances and the social development of that time. I think there is some relationship to such factors as technology and things like that. In that sense, I would agree with you, there is some erosion, no doubt, but it's not an erosion in the sense of an absolute erosion. It is a product of the times and the product of changes which brought about. We may deplore it, we may not like it. Older people, for example, might not like the way the youngsters behave. Therefore, it doesn't mean that the youngsters are less moral than the older people. I do not accept that. They are in a different situation, and they have been motivated by a different age moral, and they react to it. And this is an age of transition and confusion. In that sense, there is, but let us not say that suddenly the world has become immoral. But your second question about whether we are able to infuse morality, I think it is possible. To my mind, the vast majority of people, whether it is even in this highly affluent state, and I've traveled a little bit, gone to many places, I do not find this kind of Hollywood image of the United States as a place of loose morals or people play with human beings without any regard for them. I think the majority of families, people in this country, live fairly even life, while at the edges where these big city conglomerations take place, you get confusion, erosion. But you certainly need today people to instill new values. And I think the new values can be instilled if these values, shall I say, accord with the demands of the time. If they react to the challenges which we face today. And if these values can be posed in that way, then you will get acceptance. For me, I think the basic value today, to my mind, is survival of mankind. Because man has come to such a stage that if you fix your eyes on narrow divisions and concentrate upon these things as the most important things in life and fight about it, then the higher value or survival of civilization could be sacrificed. Then I think therefore we have need for leaders who are talking in terms of stopping the mad armament race or somehow controlling the nuclear threat and providing people some sense of security. If there is erosion of values today, one of the reasons, to my mind, is that the weaponry, the nuclear and other weaponry created, has produced a feeling in people that life is transitory, the future is uncertain, and maybe hideous, and therefore let us act as we like. And therefore, this is the relationship between the prospects of war or the threat of nuclear destruction and the behavior and values of people. I think society would be more stabilized if the threat of war hanging about them is at least slightly diminished.
Yes, sir.
I just finished traveling through India for a little bit over a year. A couple of months ago I came back. And in the course of my travels I met many people as well on the trains, had many discussions with them. And as relates to your to India being in this time of transition and confusion that many people have discussed, I met many elderly gentlemen, and despite their pleasure at the independence of India, there was still some fond sentiment for the British Raj, and returned to some days when there was perhaps less corruption and things seemed on an administrative level to proceed in a more orderly fashion. And I'm curious as to what tough measures that India is taking now to turn around the black economy and the corruption that pervades so much of India.
I think this yearning for the British Raj is something very unreal in India. There may be some people, there was certainly some degree of stability under the British. So it was stability under a very low standard level of achievement or satisfaction of the expectations or the needs of the people. There may be a few people. Look that we were not thrown together so much when the British were there. We were disconnected people. Even though they ruled one country, they were separated one. We were not involved in the problems of each other today as we are during the British period. There may be some yearning for people, for the British in a limited sense, like there is yearning for royalty in this country. I would say that. Some people wish there was a monarch sitting here. Since it is not there, you treat your presidents as monarchs. And this kind of little thing, should not be deceived by these people. And the other reason why we are soft about the British is that they had somehow created a reputation that they are incorruptible, because everybody didn't see them. They sat like gods in Delhi, and they are only an image which is created by themselves, and they are impartial and all that. And secondly, but we know that how much money was looted from India by the British and what types of society existed among the British themselves, which you know if you read the novels of the time. Secondly, the soft corner we have because of Gandhi, because of Nehru, who, while struggling against the British, said that we want to remain friends with them. The only quarrel is that they are ruling us. Let them leave and we will be friendly with them. And this kind of struggle without hatred and with the objective of having a friendly relations with Britain created this possibility for people to look at the British in a way. Now, you talked about corruption. Well, there is corruption in India, I won't deny it. And, but I think it has been so tremendously exaggerated. If I were an investigative reporter and I go around this country, I can produce many about it. In fact, I was asked this question in Chicago. I said only this, in this great city of Chicago. I have read something about it. I am surprised that you are asking this question. So, corruption is a disease in many countries. But I have been a civil servant, most of us have been, and I tell you, this kind of corrupt situations which have come across, in my own experience, was rare. I know that if you go to a railway booking clerk, you may have to give some money for a ticket, but not. Most people can't afford this price. They buy tickets nevertheless. I know, I tell you, I don't want to argue in polemical terms. One small businessman told me in New York, in New Jersey actually, that he has a, what you call a dry cleaning establishment. He said once a month or once in 2 months, somebody goes around, I think with the district, whatever office it is, with a key in his hand, try to find out he is running his business properly. And he told me that the arrangement is that he has to give $10. If you give $10, he won't bother. Otherwise, he has authority to lock this without anything. Now, we don't ask these questions. These are facts of life. And I agree with you that we have talked ceaselessly ourselves about corruption in India and the need for rooting it out. We accept our shortcomings. We are prepared to take steps. Many people have been punished. Many people find it not easy to do so under law. But the image that
I'd like to ask you, what part do you think India can play in having the Soviets get out of Afghanistan?
well, we are playing our own part in this. And there are so many critical points in the world today. First of all, let me say what we have uttered about this situation in Afghanistan. There is a feeling here that we have not said enough about Soviet withdrawals from Afghanistan. That is not true. It is true that we have not day in and day out made speeches condemning the Soviet Union. But we have stated, and we have stated, unlike many other countries, not sitting in their foreign offices, but when our Prime Minister went to Moscow, President Brezhnev, the late President Brezhnev, was, I think, standing next to her at a press conference, and she said at this press conference, India would like Soviets to withdraw their troops from Afghanistan. This is the way we told them. We think this is the right way to do, because what we want is to achieve results. Now, there is also a feeling here that many other countries are in season and out of season condemning the Soviet Union. The United States can afford to do it because it is a great power, it's far away here. But countries like Pakistan, for example, they said once in the first Islamic conference, and after that, even the second Islamic conference did not use the word condemn. They used the word concern. The reason is something very logical. The reason is that being neighbors, countries near to Afghanistan, our great objective, urgent reason is to find the troops really leave. And not to get Soviet Union into a jam and say that, well, you are like us in Vietnam. It doesn't serve us any good. Even if the Soviet Union is stewing its own juice in Afghanistan as what happened in Vietnam. It may be good to talk about, but it doesn't solve the problem. It will solve our problem because it can overflow into our countries the insecurity and the dangers involved if the Afghan situation goes on indefinitely like this. Therefore, while taking the principal position on the substance of it, that the foreign troops must withdraw, and we use the word Soviet troops also, we said there must be a dialogue, negotiation for settling this question, because we are pretty sure that there is no other method of getting the Soviet troops out of Afghanistan. United States, the only country which could apply force, was not willing to apply massive force to liberate Afghanistan from the Soviets. Then what do you get with it? Except a dialogue. And Pakistan today, who talked a different language earlier, has come round and is seriously involved in a negotiating process under the UN umbrella. And latest, our information is that there are some prospects of these negotiations going forward. I'm not saying that the problem will be settled immediately, but we only see this method of tackling the question. All the parties concerned should, through dialogue, settle it. Even the Great Korean War was not settled finally by force. Though force was used, you have to sit on the table and talk with even to the Koreans who they did not recognize. And if it is so, we feel that for the world, for us, for neighbors, it is to have this kind of process set in motion. Because our feeling is that Soviet Union is fighting in a difficult situation in Afghanistan, and all great powers, like even small ones, have their faces to save. And negotiation is the only way you can save the face of a great power and let it withdraw. So it is for this constructive purpose we have not adopted a sentimentally or emotionally satisfying method of just condemning every day.
Yes.
What do you see as the future of India's economy in the next 50 years? Do you see India developing a consumer economy similar to the United States, or a state-run economy, or something more like maybe Japan, exports, concentrating industrial development and exports? What do you see as the economic future of India?
I don't think we can compare India even after 50 years with Japan or the United States. Situation is very different. But even today, there is a vast, sophisticated consumer sector in India. The modern sector in India, that is, people are educated, consume in a high standard, is estimated about 100 million people. About 100 million people have been elevated out of the 700 million to the stage. So you have a good, sophisticated market of 100 million people. Relatively, this may be small, but if you compare with the markets in many countries, it is an immense market. This is why the private enterprise in the United States is wanting to go into India. Even this market itself is very attractive. And we are progressively catering to the consumer needs of the people. If during the last, especially 25 years of planning and development, we have created this consumer market of 100 million, we think it should be possible to extend this market considerably. Even, I have been said, even if you have 5% more growth rate in the rural sector, the market which would be generated by that would be considerable. So there would be a growing consumer market in India. And there will be a growing private sector in India. Already, the private sector in India is about 80% of the economy. The entire agriculture is in private hands. Small industries, middle industries are in private hands. And even some of the big industries are operated by private enterprise. It is about 20% of the economy, especially public utilities and heavy industries, which our private enterprise did not have the resources or ability to develop at the time of India, the independence. And that is the one which the state has taken over, and what is today the state sector. Therefore, this state sector, I think, will remain. It is being liberalized. We have liberalized the economy considerably as a result of economic progress we have made. Imports have been liberalized. investment rules have been liberalized so that the private markets can go in. I think the president of OPIC, the Organization of Private Overseas Private Industrial Investment Corporation, Craig Nellen, who went to India, he came back and said that India has one of the most highly favorable market for U.S. investment, climate for U.S. investment.
Mrs. Jacobs?
And we did see some slowly disappearing. My question is it still slowly disappearing, or has it disappeared? And if it still exists at all, how do you choose?
Well, caste still exists in India. You know, it's a social system centuries old. And when the rest of the modern world was changing under the impact of industrialization in the 18th and 19th centuries, we were ruled by a foreign power. And during this period, particularly, the caste got more crystallized because British did introduce one or two types of social reforms, but their major objective was to keep their rule on without different sections of the people opposing them. Therefore, they didn't want to tamper with the Indian social system and make the upper classes and upper caste turn against them. They wanted to keep them satisfied. Therefore, very little, hardly anything was done during this long period to reform or to disturb the old caste system. But it was being disturbed by industrialization, which first took place under the British, and some of the modern ideas with the British introduced. In that sense, the British had a constructive impact on this, changing the old order. After independence, in a legal sense, all these distinctions have been abolished. But in fact, it takes much longer time. I mean, but it is disappearing fast under the impact of economic changes, impact of education, with greater mobility available in the economy, because a son of a barber may not be a barber, he may be a small technician, or a son of a farmer may not be a farmer. So this occupational basis of caste has been thoroughly tampered with by modern developments. But the sentiment of caste still lingers, though much less strongly. It is one area in which caste is strong, which is in politics. It is a new phenomenon. Soon after independence, the caste feelings have been dissipating under Gandhi's social reform movement, under the new constitution. Then politicians started finding out that the easiest way of getting a vote, a block vote, is to appeal to the caste. So, to some extent, through this democratic political process, one of the evils of India in a new form, in a political form, has been given a little bit of boost. But fundamentally, the caste is being tampered with so rapidly. I mean, you can look around, you come to my office, I will show you how many of my officers have wives from other states and other castes and other languages. This is a type of change taking all over in India. Now, certainly, this is a drag on our democracy. But let us, how long these things will take. Let us take, though the Negroes, blacks have been liberated long time ago there. I know that in many places they could not exercise their vote. I know that in the election of Tom Bradley, race played a part. I know that is playing a part in Chicago. So I'm not blaming this. These are strongly rooted historical values and traditions and sentiments which take long time to wipe out fully. What is important is that our constitution, our laws regulate, prevent discrimination on the basis of caste or sex or religion, and our policies have been directed towards abolishing class distinction. Our educations have been given an orientation for this process, and above all, industrialization and economic system is most powerfully affecting the roots for the caste system. Yes.
Mr. Ambassador, those who have conflicts in your outcome of the time of the land, to what extent do women really participate in the social, economic, and political aspects of India?
Yes. Well, I would not claim that because our Prime Minister is a woman, that means that there has been entire liberation of Indian womanhood. I would not claim that. But the significance is that in a society which is a male society for centuries, a woman could rise to that position and the males would accept it. I mean, this is a changing in the thinkings of people which have taken place. And in various other fields, women do participate, not only in politics, as lawyers, as officers, in factories. Women do work side by side with men, more or less without wage discrimination under law. Maybe traditionally in some places this may be violated, but by and large the law prevents this kind of discrimination. Above all, women had a vote. This is important thing. Even they did not have to struggle for the vote, they got a vote, and therefore the women's vote really is an important thing in Indian politics. In fact, this is one of the constituents of Mrs. Gandhi, or anybody who cannot give an image to the woman voters as espousing their causes. And quite often, what is the development of women in a developing country? It is not the kind of liberation movements you talk about here. It is basic things. It is food, it is health, it is family planning, and all these developments which apply to men and women equally. This is the main thing we have to do in order to liberate women ultimately. Important thing is that the law permits full freedom, full equality for women, and the political process did this because under Gandhiji, vast numbers of women were brought into politics, with the result that many of them occupied very high positions immediately after independence, and they do that. This is some kind of a, shall I say, favorable factor for safeguarding the specific interests of women.
Mr. Stern.
Mr. Ambassador, I'd like to return for a moment to the question of Afghanistan. The Russians have been there for over 3 years now. During that period, as you suggested, the United States has condemned the presence of the Russians in Afghanistan, and India has said it does not like it very much. And also during that period, there's been an assumption in this country that the Russians are involved in something comparable to Vietnam, and they're taking terrible losses, and it's a terrible embarrassment to them. And from your country, there's been a steady suggestion that the Russians are unhappy to be there, that they would like to get out, and that there might be some movement and negotiations. We've heard the same story from your government and from the U.S. government for 3 years. Now let's turn that assumption on its head. Let's assume that the Russians are consolidating their position in Afghanistan as some reports indicate. Let's assume that the Russians wish to stay there indefinitely. If this is the case, could you give us your assessment of how that changes the strategic picture in Southern Asia, and why you think the Russians would have a strategic interest in staying in Afghanistan?
Well, Mr. Stern, it is a very heavy question, if I may. try to answer it. I do not think that we do not believe that Russians will be able to stay indefinitely in Afghanistan. This is a basic proposition we have. And I think this is because the Afghans have the spirit of independence. And even the government in Afghanistan would like to get more freedom for themselves, would like foreign forces not to be there, though they may not say it now. I think it is their own aspiration too. Because of this, for them to consolidate their power, their occupation in a foreign country, to our mind, is not possible. Our own freedom experience, struggle experience, the experience of many other countries say that a situation in a foreign country cannot just be consolidated by occupation by another country. This is the many strategists in the United States take that, well, nothing can remove the Russians, and therefore why don't you start abusing them, or why don't you at least criticize them? This is more or less the thing. They are not going in any way. So I tell them, we just don't accept that proposition. We feel that it is impossible in the modern world, however great and powerful a nation may be, to hold another country indefinitely without the consent of that country or the people. And we also know that there are many elements in the Afghan situation, of which the presence of the Soviet troops may be a very major one. But there are various other things. It is not a simple question. And the Soviets themselves, the Afghans themselves, have said that they are prepared to negotiate this problem and find a political settlement. This is one major difference. They themselves say that we are prepared to enter into a negotiating process. The Afghan government said it. And this shows that they don't themselves accept indefinite presence or presence for all time as a sustainable objective. Question is how to bring about it. We know that there was intervention in Afghanistan from other sides. May not be massive military intervention like this. It's a long story of Afghanistan for the control of this by the great powers. It's a whole history also we got. Elements of it still are there. So the proposition with the UN, which we had advocated, which the UN Secretary General has put forward, is you must have, of course, known about these propositions, to include the withdrawal in a package of political settlement, which covers non-intervention, safeguarding the independence, sovereignty, and non-alignment of Afghanistan, enabling the refugees to go back in honor and freedom. These are the various elements to put in one package. I don't think you can get the Russians out as an isolated single proposition. But if you put into a package, which will also safeguard some of their interest in that region, I think it is possible to get, and it has been the experience of recent UN negotiators that such a settlement is beyond the realm of possibility, and we would like to work for it. And because we do not see that if we adopt a confrontational or Cold War attitude in regard to Afghanistan, what we fear is that in this confrontation, the independence and integrity of the Afghan people might be destroyed, and it might overflow into the neighborhood.
Mr. Sherman?
Mr. Ambassador, you have stated that the survival of the world is the central issue. Preceding you tonight, for much of the world has been the award-winning movie Gandhi and its message. How do you and your nation and your government of 700 million people perceive what is going on in the words that come from our president and from the leaders of Russia as far as nuclear disarmament, first strike, the chance of nuclear world destruction, how do you perceive as a nation there, non-aligned, what you could do about this? You already have coming forth the power of a great idea, which we are seeing from the screen, and that we are now have a renewed interest in India and what your country has to say. Could you not build now from that point of message and strength and go out from your position and carry forth the message to the countries that are talking the way they are to each other?
Yes. I think this is the role we can play in regard to this very vital question facing the world. And if you recall, during the recent non-aligned conference held in Delhi, Mrs. Gandhi, in her opening speech, said that the non-alignment movement is the greatest peace movement in history. We can affect, first of all, by influencing the thinking of people in this vast area of developing countries, first of all, that is non-aligned, and other developing countries outside the non-aligned group, and making them follow a policy which will prevent the two superpowers or the military systems to prevent being engulfed into their system of confrontation. This is one thing we can do. This is the significance of non-alignment to peace, because if the world is sharply and completely divided into two, and every small nation in the world is with this group or that group, then we have no cushion between them. You are facing each other starkly and dangerously. So non-alignment by these countries remaining out of the power conflict or joining the power pursuits of each bloc to some extent hope to influence, that prevent a war. And secondly, we hope to not only influence the thinking of people in the developing world, but send this idea of peace to people even in the aligned countries. This has been the basic concept of non-alignment. Not a group standing in itself, but a loose group of nations. We say that we do not believe in the finality of alignment or the finality of the division of the world. The world is essentially one, mankind is essentially one, and they can live together. And this idea is to spread even among the minds of people in the Soviet Union, in the United States, and in the armed camps themselves, and influence public opinion. If I may frankly say that today in the world, organized public opinion is the greatest practical force for changing the progress towards militarization and war. I do not see any other great force like that of the public opinion, that is people trying to safeguard their interests and their future. Now, we regret very much the present rhetoric of conflict. I think this marks a deterioration in international relations. These rhetorics come from both sides. Harsh words are said. We would first of all like a lessening in the tension, this type of tension between the great powers, and get them to talk to each other. Because this, whether you like it or not, is a major fact of life, the possession of weapons by the Soviet Union and the United States. And I think they themselves are fully aware of the danger of these weapons. And I feel that whatever be the rhetoric, gradually these two countries, powers, are going to sit together and talk seriously. And I think it is what both sides want, to my mind. Though some of their strategies, some of their tactics may be holding this up. But eventually, I believe, I have to take that optimistic view that even the superpowers armed with nuclear weapons are moving gradually or will move gradually under the pressure of public opinion in the world, under the pressure of public opinion in their own country, and also preserving what they want to preserve for their own people. Because nuclear war will not preserve what you want to secure for your own people. And all these compulsions will exercise on them, and the leadership of both countries will move towards negotiations, accommodation, and at least an agreement to live together without burning each other into ashes.
On that, I think it's the appropriate as well as the exact time for us to end our question period. I must admit I feel some deja vu. I remember the enthusiasms of Chester Bowles of years ago, his enthusiasms for India, which struck the same chords. Of course, the positive contributions of India, the notion of the proximity of our two nations in terms of values, and certainly the stabilizing influence which India is able to exert in South Asia, and as I said, joined with the positive, constructive diplomatic roles. The first ambassador that I had the privilege of introducing was your predecessor by some 28 years, Mr. Mehta, at a public meeting as a schoolboy, when I was a schoolboy. And, so certainly I think all of us have enduring positive orientations toward your nation and the role that it plays in the world. We appreciate very much you sharing your time with us and reinforcing those notions.